Sound Editions presents Getting the Love You Want, a Guide for Couples, by Harville Hendrix. Read for you by the author.
Getting the Love You Want. In today's society, you're encouraged to view marriage as a box. First, you choose a mate. Then you climb into a box, and once you've had a chance to settle in, you take your first close look at your box mate. If you like what you see, you stay put. If you don't, you climb out of the box and scout around for another mate. In other words, marriage is viewed as an unchanging state, and whether or not it works depends upon your ability to attract a good partner. The common solution to an unhappy marriage, the one chosen by nearly 50% of all couples, is to divorce and start all over again with a new and hopefully better mate. Unfortunately, the only alternative many people see to divorce is to stay in the box, tighten the lid, and put up with a disappointing relationship for the rest of their lives. They learn to cope with an empty marriage by filling themselves up with food, alcohol, drugs, activities, work, television, and romantic fantasies. Resigned to the belief that their longing for an intimate love will never be realized. I am proposing a more hopeful, and I believe more accurate view of love relationships. Marriage is not a static state between two unchanging people. Marriage is a psychological and spiritual journey that begins in the ecstasy of attraction, meanders through a rocky stretch of self-discovery, and culminates in the creation of an intimate, joyful, lifelong union. Whether or not you realize the full potential of this vision depends not on your ability to attract the perfect mate, but on your willingness to acquire knowledge about hidden parts of yourself. When couples come to me for marital therapy, I usually ask them how they met. Maggie and Victor, a couple in their mid-50s who were contemplating divorce after 29 years of marriage, told me this story. "We met in graduate school," recalled Maggie. "We were renting rooms in a big house with a shared kitchen. I was cooking breakfast when I looked up and saw this man, Victor, walk into the room. I had the strangest reaction. My legs wanted to carry me to him, but my head was telling me to stay away. The feelings were so strong that I felt faint and had to sit down." Once Maggie recovered from shock, she introduced herself to Victor, and the two of them spent half the morning talking. "That was it," said Victor. "We were together every possible moment for the next 2 months, and then we eloped." Not all first encounters produce seismic shock waves. Raina and Mark, a couple 10 years younger, had a more tepid and prolonged courtship. They met through a mutual friend who didn't think they would be a good match. "He's very tall, and you're short," the friend explained to Raina. "He's Protestant, and you're Jewish. He's quiet, and you talk all the time." But Raina liked Mark right away. She recalled, "He was interesting in a quiet sort of way. We spent the whole evening talking in the kitchen." Raina laughed and then added, "I suspect that I did most of the talking." That was the beginning of their courtship. But it was never a torrid romance. "We dated for a while, then we stopped for a while," said Mark. "Then we started dating again. Finally, 3 years later, we got married." These contrasting stories raise some interesting questions. Why do some people fall in love with such intensity, seemingly at first glance? Why do some couples ease into marriage with a level-headed friendship? And why, as in the case of Raina and Mark, do so many couples seem to have opposite personality traits? When we have the answers to these questions, we will also have our first clues to the hidden psychological desires that underlie marriage. In recent years, scientists from various disciplines have labored to deepen our understanding of romantic love, and valuable insights have come from each area of research. Some biologists contend that there is a certain biologic to courtship behavior. We instinctively select mates who will enhance the survival of the species. Men are drawn to classically beautiful women because these qualities indicate youth and robust health, signs that a woman is in the peak of her childbearing years. On the other hand, women instinctively favor mates with pronounced alpha qualities, the ability to dominate other males and bring home more than their share of the kill. Now, if we can put aside for the moment our indignity at having our attractiveness to the opposite sex reduced to our breeding and food and money-gathering potential, there's some validity to the theory. Just take a quick look at the personal messages in the classified ads. Successful 45-year-old single white male with private jet desires attractive, slim 20-year-old single white female, and so on. But there's got to be more to love than this. Social psychologists have developed what is known as the exchange theory of mate selection. The basic idea of the exchange theory is that we select mates who are more or less our equals. We size each other up as coolly as business executives contemplating a merger, noting each other's physical appearance, financial status, and social rank, as well as various personality traits such as kindness, creativity, and a sense of humor. We tally up each other's scores, and if the numbers are roughly equivalent, the trading bell rings and the bidding begins. A third idea, the persona theory, adds yet another dimension to the phenomenon of romantic attraction. The persona theory maintains that an important factor in mate selection is the way a potential suitor enhances our self-esteem. There appears to be some validity to this theory. We've all experienced some pride and perhaps some embarrassment because of the way we believe our mates are perceived by others. It does indeed matter to us what others think. Although these three theories help explain some aspects of romantic love, we're still left with our original questions. What accounts for the intensity of romantic love, as in the case of Maggie and Victor? And why, as in the case of Raina and Mark, do so many couples have complementary traits? We need to understand the role that the unconscious mind plays in mate selection. To do this, let's take a brief look at the structure of the brain. Most of the time, we are only aware of the activity going on in the cerebral cortex, that part of the brain that is conscious, alert, and in contact with our present surroundings. I call this part of the brain the new brain because it appeared most recently in evolutionary history. In sharp contrast to the new brain, you're unaware of most of the functions of your old brain, the brain stem and the limbic system. Your old brain is primarily concerned with self-preservation. As it goes about its job of ensuring your safety, your old brain is only hazily aware of the external world. For example, your old brain has no sense of linear time. Today, tomorrow, and yesterday do not exist. Everything that was still is. Understanding this basic fact about the nature of your unconscious may help explain why you sometimes have feelings within your marriage that seem alarmingly out of proportion to the events that triggered them. For example, imagine that you're a 35-year-old woman, a lawyer in a prestigious firm. One day you're sitting in your office thinking warm, loving thoughts about your husband, and you decide to call him on the phone. You dial his number, and his secretary informs you that he's out of the office. Suddenly you feel a surge of anxiety. Where is he? Your rational mind knows that he's probably calling on a client or enjoying a late lunch. But another part of you feels, let's be honest, abandoned. There you are, a sophisticated, capable woman, and just because your husband isn't available, you feel as vulnerable as you did when your mother left you all day with an unfamiliar babysitter. Your old brain is locked in an archaic perspective. Now that we've spent some time pondering the nature of the unconscious mind, let's return to our original discussion of mate selection. In selecting a mate, we are looking for someone who has the predominant character traits of the people who raised us. Our old brain, trapped in the eternal now and having only a dim awareness of the outside world, is trying to recreate the environment of childhood. And the reason the old brain is trying to resurrect the past is not a matter of habit or blind compulsion, but of a compelling need to heal old childhood wounds. In choosing the person you chose to fall in love with and marry, your old brain believed that it had finally found the ideal candidate to make up for the psychological and emotional damage you experienced in childhood. When you hear these words, you may immediately think about serious childhood traumas such as sexual or physical abuse, or the suffering that comes from having parents who divorced or died or were alcoholics. And for many people, this is the tragic reality of childhood. However, even if you were fortunate enough to grow up in a safe, nurturing environment, you still bear invisible scars from childhood, because from the very moment you were born, you were a complex, dependent creature with a never-ending cycle of needs. And no parents, no matter how devoted, are able to respond perfectly to all of these changing needs. Newborn babies have no sense of distinction between themselves and the rest of the world. As adults, we seem to have a fleeting memory of this state of original wholeness. We seem to recall a distant time when we were more unified and connected to the world. This feeling of unity that a child experiences in the womb and in the first few months of life gradually fades, giving way to a drive to be a distinct self. A child's success at feeling both distinct from and connected to its mother has a profound impact on all later relationships. When a little girl wanders out of the room, her insecure mother might call out, "Don't go into the next room, you might get hurt." The child dutifully comes back to her mother's lap. But inside her shell of conformity, she's afraid. Her inner drive for autonomy is being denied. She fears that if she always comes running back to her mother, she will be engulfed. She will be trapped in a symbiotic union forever. This fear of engulfment becomes a key part of her character, and in later years she becomes what I call an isolator, a person who unconsciously pushes other people away. When she marries, her need to be a distinct self will be on the top of her hidden agenda. Some children grow up with the opposite kind of parents, ones who push them away when they come running to them for comfort. "Go away, I'm busy." The caretakers are not equipped to handle any needs but their own, and their children grow up feeling emotionally abandoned. Eventually, they grow up to become what I call fusers, people who seem to have an insatiable need for closeness. Underneath their clinging behavior is a young child who needed more time on a parent's lap. Now let's turn to another kind of childhood wound, an even subtler kind of psychic injury called socialization. All those messages we receive from our caretakers and from society at large that tell us who we are and how we have to behave. These, too, play a compelling but hidden role in marriage. We all have parts of ourselves that we've hidden from consciousness. I call these missing elements the lost self. Whenever we complain that we can't think, or that we can't feel anything, or can't dance, or can't have orgasms, or aren't creative, we're identifying natural abilities, thoughts, or feelings that we have surgically removed from our awareness. Our lost self was formed early in childhood, largely as a result of our caretakers' well-intentioned efforts to teach us to get along with others. There were certain thoughts and feelings we could not have, certain natural behaviors that we had to extinguish, and certain talents and aptitudes we had to deny. In thousands of ways, both subtly and overtly, our parents gave us the message that they approved of only a part of us. In essence, we were told that we could not be whole and exist in this culture. One of the areas in which we were most restricted was our bodies. At a very young age, we were taught to cover our bodies in gender-specific ways and not to talk about or touch our genitals. Like most children growing up in this culture, you were probably made to feel embarrassed or guilty or naughty that you had a body that was capable of exquisite sensation. To be a good boy or girl, you had to psychologically disown that part of yourself. Your emotions were another prime candidate for socialization. Temper tantrums are noisy and unpleasant, and most parents try to discourage them. It's the rare parent who validates a child's anger. Imagine a little girl's relief if her parents were to say something like this: "I can see that you're mad. You don't want to do what I ask, but I'm the parent and you're the child, and you need to do what I say." Having her anger acknowledged would contribute to her sense of self. She would be able to tell herself, "I exist. My parents are aware of my feelings. I may not always get my way, but I'm listened to and respected." She would be allowed to stay in touch with her anger and retain an essential part of her wholeness. But such is not the fate of most children. In their attempts to repress certain thoughts, feelings, and behavior, parents use various techniques. The way parents influence their children most deeply, however, is by example. Children instinctively observe the choices their parents make, the freedoms and pleasures they allow themselves, the talents they develop, the abilities they ignore, and the rules they follow. Eventually, the child comes to the conclusion that some thoughts and feelings are so unacceptable that they should be eliminated. So he constructs an imaginary parent in his head to police his thoughts and activities, a part of the mind that psychologists call the superego. Now, whenever the child has a forbidden thought, he experiences a self-administered jolt of anxiety. This is so unpleasant that the child puts to sleep some of these forbidden parts of himself. He then constructs a false self, a character structure that serves a double purpose. It camouflages those parts of his being that he has repressed and protects him from further injury. A child brought up by a sexually repressive, distant mother, for instance, may become a tough guy. He tells himself, "I don't care if my mother isn't very affectionate. I don't need that mushy stuff. I can make it on my own. And another thing, I think sex is dirty." In later years, when he overcomes his reluctance to getting involved in a love relationship, it's likely that he will criticize his partner for her desire for intimacy and her intact sexuality. "Why are you so obsessed with sex? It's not normal." At some point in a child's life, this ingenious form of self-protection becomes the cause of further wounding as the child is criticized for having these negative traits. Others condemn him for being distant or needy or self-centered. His attackers don't see the wound he's trying to protect, and they don't appreciate the clever nature of his defense. All they see is the neurotic side of his personality. Now the child is caught in a bind. He needs to hold on to his adaptive character traits because they serve a useful purpose, but he doesn't want to be rejected. In order to maintain a positive self-image and enhance his chances for survival, he has to deny them. These negative traits become what is referred to as the disowned self, those parts of the false self that are too painful to acknowledge. Let's stop for a moment and sort out this proliferation of self-parts. We've now succeeded in fracturing your original wholeness, the loving and unified nature that you were born with, into three separate entities. 1. Your lost self, those parts of your being that you had to repress because of the demands of society. 2. Your false self, the facade that you erected in order to fill the void created by this repression and by a lack of adequate nurturing. 3. Your disowned self, the negative parts of your false self that met with disapproval and were therefore denied. We cover the wounds of childhood with healing ointment and gauze in an attempt to heal ourselves, but despite our efforts, an emptiness wells up inside of us. We develop the profound conviction that finding the right person, that perfect mate, will complete us and make us whole. This special person can't be just anyone. It has to be someone who stirs within us a deep sense of recognition. This is the one I've been looking for. This is the one who will make up for the wounds of the past. This person is inevitably someone who has both the positive and the negative traits of our parents. Many people have a hard time accepting the idea that they have searched for partners who resembled their caretakers. In fact, if they had an unhappy childhood, they may have deliberately searched for people who were radically different from their caretakers. But no matter what their conscious intentions, most people are attracted to mates who have their caretakers' positive and negative traits, and typically the negative traits are more influential. This is because the part of your brain that directed your search for a mate was your time-locked, myopic old brain. And what your old brain was trying to do was recreate the conditions of your upbringing in order to correct them. Having received enough nurturing to survive, but not enough to feel satisfied, it was attempting to return to the scene of your original frustration so that you could resolve your unfinished business. In addition to your unconscious drive to duplicate the emotional relationships of your childhood, you also had a drive to recover your lost self, those thoughts and feelings and behaviors that you had to repress in order to adapt to your family and to society. Think for a moment about some part of your being that you feel is deficient. Maybe you feel that you lack artistic talent or strong emotions or the ability to think clearly and rationally. If you managed to form an intimate relationship with someone who had a gift that you felt you lacked, you suddenly felt more complete. It was as if you had merged with the other person and become whole. Look around you, and you will find ample evidence that people choose mates with complementary traits. Dan is glib and talkative. His wife Gretchen is thoughtful and introverted. Janice is an intuitive thinker. Her husband Patrick is very logical. What people are doing in these yin-yang matches is trying to reclaim their lost selves by proxy. To guide you in your search for the ideal mate, you relied on an unconscious image that you had been forming since birth. I have given this inner picture the name imago, which is a Latin term for image. Essentially, your imago is a composite picture of the people who influenced you most strongly at an early age. To a large degree, whether or not you've been romantically attracted to someone depended on the degree to which that person matched your imago. At this point in our discussion of marriage, we have a more complete understanding of the mystery of romantic attraction. To the biological theory and the exchange theory and the persona theory we discussed earlier, we've added the idea of the unconscious search for a person who matches our imago. This model also gives us new insight into the sources of marital conflict. If the primary reason we select our mates is that they resemble our caretakers, it is inevitable that they're going to re-injure some very sensitive wounds. But before we sink into the quagmire of pain and confusion called the power struggle, I would like to focus on the ecstasy of romantic love, those first few months or years of a relationship when we are filled with the delicious expectation of wish fulfillment. I know from my own experience and from listening to others that lovers believe their time together is unique. It is a time they savor and return to in their memories again and again. Everything around them shimmered with a pristine newness, just as it did when they were young. But the biggest change was in the way they felt about themselves. Suddenly they had more energy and a healthier outlook on life. They felt wittier, more playful, more optimistic. When they looked in the mirror, they had a new fondness for the face that looked back at them. Maybe they were worthy of their lover's affection after all. At the peak of their love relationship, these intense good feelings radiated outward, and people felt more loving and accepting of everyone. For a brief time, they saw the world not through the fractured lens of their split-off state, but through the smooth, polished lens of their original nature. For a while, lovers are able to cling to the illusion of romantic love. However, this requires a good deal of unconscious play-acting. One bit of make-believe in which virtually all lovers engage is trying to appear to be more emotionally healthy than they really are. After all, if you don't appear to have many needs of your own, your partner is free to assume that your goal in life is to nurture, not to be nurtured, and this makes you very desirable indeed. One woman, Louise, described to me the efforts she went to appear to be the perfect mate for her future husband, Steve. A few weeks after they met, Louise invited Steve over to her house for dinner. I wanted to display my domestic talent, she said. He saw me as a career woman, and I wanted him to see me cook too. To make her life seem as simple and uncomplicated as possible, she arranged to have her 11-year-old son from a previous marriage stay the night with a friend. Then she thoroughly cleaned the house, planned the menu around the only two things she could cook really well, quiche and Roquefort salad, and arranged fresh flowers in all the rooms. When Steve walked into the house, dinner was ready. Her makeup was fresh, and classical music was on the stereo. Steve, in turn, came as his most charming, helpful self, and when dinner was over, he insisted on washing the dishes and fixing the broken porch light. That night, they declared their love for each other, and for several months they were both able to orchestrate their lives so that they had few, if any, needs of their own. Most of us go to a lot of trouble in the early stages of a relationship to appear to be ideal mates. But for most couples, there's a noticeable change in the relationship about the time they make a definite commitment to each other. At that point, the pleasing, inviting dance of courtship draws to a close, and lovers begin to want not only the expectation of need fulfillment, the illusion that was responsible for the euphoria of romantic love, but the reality as well. Suddenly, it isn't enough that their partners be affectionate, clever, attractive, and fun-loving. They now have to satisfy a whole hierarchy of expectations, some conscious, but most hidden from their awareness. Their partners are going to do it all: satisfy unmet childhood needs, complement lost self-parts, nurture them in a consistent and loving way, and be eternally available to them. These are the same expectations that fuel the excitement of romantic love, but now there's less of a desire to reciprocate. After all, people don't get married to take care of their partner's needs. They get married to further their own psychological and emotional growth. So the partners take a big step back from each other and wait for the dividends of togetherness to start rolling in. This bleak rationing of love is partly the result of a disturbing revelation. At some point in their relationships, most people discover that some aspect of their partner's character, a personality trait they once thought highly desirable, is beginning to annoy them. A man finds that his wife's conservative nature, one of the primary reasons he was attracted to her, is now making her seem staid and prudish. A woman discovers that her husband's tendency to be quiet and withdrawn, a trait she once thought was an indication of his spiritual nature, is making her feel lonely and isolated. What is the explanation of these disturbing reversals? If you will recall, in our desire to be spiritually whole, we chose marriage partners who made up for the parts of our being that were split off in childhood. Through union with our partners, we felt connected to a hidden part of ourselves. At first, this arrangement seemed to work, but as time passed, our partners' complementary traits began to stir up feelings and attributes in us that were still taboo. In an effort to protect our own existence, we were trying to diminish our partner's reality. Your growing discomfort with your partner's complementary traits was only part of the rapidly brewing storm. Your partner's negative traits, the ones that you had resolutely denied during the romantic phase of your relationship, were also beginning to come into sharp focus. Suddenly, your partner's chronic depression or drinking problem or stinginess or lack of responsibility became evident. This gave you the sickening realization that not only were you not going to get your needs met, but your partner was destined to wound you in the very same way you were wounded in childhood. So far, we've talked about two factors that fuel the power struggle that takes over once the romantic interlude is over. First, our partners make us feel anxious for stirring up forbidden parts of ourselves. Second, our partners have to appear to have the same negative traits as our parents, adding further injury to old wounds and thereby awakening our unconscious fear of death. Now, there's a third and final aspect of the power struggle that deserves our attention. Remember when I talked about the imago? I described that many of our joyful feelings of romantic love come from projecting positive aspects of our imago onto our partners. When we get to the power struggle, what happens is that we begin to project our own denied negative traits as well. If you will recall, I talked about the fact that all people have a dark side to their nature, a part of their being that they try to ignore. For the most part, these are creative adaptations to childhood wounds. People also acquire negative traits by observing their parents. A father's judgmental nature and a mother's tendency to belittle herself, for example, become traits passed on to the children. But as the children become more self-aware, they recognize that these are the very traits they dislike in their parents, and they do their best to deny them. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Not only do the children manifest these negative traits in themselves, but when they grow up, they also look for these traits in potential mates, for they are an essential part of their imagos. The imago is not only an inner image of the opposite sex, therefore, it is also a description of the disowned self. Now we have defined the three major sources of conflict that make up the power struggle. As the illusion of romantic love slowly erodes, husbands and wives begin to stir up each other's repressed behaviors and feelings, to re-injure each other's childhood wounds, and to project their own negative traits onto each other. All of these interactions are unconscious. All people know is that they feel confused, angry, anxious, depressed, and unloved. And it is only natural that they blame all this unhappiness on their partners. They haven't changed. They're the same people they used to be. It's their partners who have changed. In despair, people begin to use negative tactics to force their partners to be more loving. They withhold their affection and become emotionally distant. They become irritable and critical. They attack and blame. They believe that if they give their partners enough pain, the partners will return to their former loving ways. What makes people believe that hurting their partners will make them behave more pleasantly? Why don't people simply tell each other in plain English that they want more affection or attention or lovemaking or freedom, or whatever it is they're craving? Once again, our old brains are to blame. When we were babies, we didn't smile sweetly at our mothers to get them to take care of us. We simply opened our mouths and screamed. When partners don't tell each other what they want and constantly criticize each other for missing the boat, it's no wonder that the spirit of love and cooperation disappears. In its place comes the grim determination of the power struggle, in which each partner tries to force the other to meet his or her needs. When you are immersed in the power struggle, life seems chaotic. You have no reference points, but from a distant perspective, the power struggle can be seen to follow a predictable course, one that parallels the well-documented stages of grief in a dying or bereaved person. But the death is not the death of the real person. It's the death of the illusion of romantic love. First comes the shock, that horrifying moment of truth when a window opens and a wrenching thought invades your consciousness. This is not the person I thought I had married. After the shock comes denial. The disappointment is so great that you don't allow yourself to see the truth. You do your best to see your partner's negative traits in a positive light, but eventually the denial can no longer be sustained and you feel betrayed. You're angry, and the degree of your pain is the degree of the disparity between your earlier fantasy of your partner and your partner's emerging reality. If you stick it out beyond the angry stage of the power struggle, some of the venom drains away, and you enter the fourth stage, bargaining. This stage goes something like this. If you will give up your drinking, I'll be more interested in sex. Or, if you let me spend more days sailing, I'll spend more time with the children. The last stage of the power struggle is despair. When couples reach this final juncture, they no longer have any hope of finding happiness or love within the relationship. At this point, approximately half the couples withdraw the last vestiges of hope and file for divorce. Most of those who stay married create what is called a parallel marriage and try to find all their happiness outside the relationship. A very few, perhaps as few as 5% of all couples, find a way to resolve the power struggle and go on to create a deeply satisfying relationship. What is the way out of this labyrinth of confusion? What lies beyond the power struggle? Let's talk about a new kind of relationship, the conscious marriage, and show how it helps husbands and wives begin to satisfy each other's childhood longings. To achieve the valid and important objectives of the old brain, we need to enlist the aid of the new brain. Once we forge a working alliance between the powerful instinctual drives of the old brain and the discriminating cognitive powers of the new brain, we can begin to realize our unconscious goals. A conscious marriage is a marriage that fosters maximum psychological and spiritual growth. It's a marriage created by becoming conscious and cooperating with the fundamental drives of the unconscious mind, to be safe, to be healed, and to be whole. Here is a list of 10 characteristics of a conscious marriage. 1. You realize that your love relationship has a hidden purpose, the healing of childhood wounds. Instead of focusing entirely on surface needs and desires, you learn to recognize the unresolved issues that underlie them. 2. You create a more accurate image of your partner. You let go of your positive and negative projections and begin to see more of your partner's truth. 3. You take responsibility for communicating your needs and desires to your partner. You let go of the childhood belief that your partner automatically intuits your needs. 4. You become more intentional in your interactions. Instead of reacting without thinking, you train yourself to behave in a more constructive manner. 5. You learn to value your partner's needs and wishes as highly as you value your own. 6. You embrace the dark side of your personality. You acknowledge the fact that you, like everyone else, have negative traits. Then you lessen your tendency to project your negative traits onto your mate. 7. You learn new techniques to satisfy your basic needs and desires. You abandon the cajoling haranguing, and blaming of the power struggle. 8. You search within yourself for the strengths and abilities you are lacking. You learn that the only way you can truly recapture a sense of oneness is to develop the hidden traits within yourself. 9. You become more aware of your drive to be loving and whole and united with the universe. In a conscious marriage, you begin to discover your original nature. 10. You accept the difficulty of creating a good marriage. You realize that a good marriage requires commitment, discipline, and the courage to grow and change. Marriage is hard work. Let's take a closer look at number 10, the need to accept the difficulty involved in creating a good marriage. Because none of the other 9 ideas will come to fruition unless you first cultivate your willingness to grow and change. When a couple walks into my office for their first counseling session, I know little or nothing about them. All I know is that they are mired somewhere in the power struggle. And while every marriage is unique, I make it a point to establish some basic ground rules for therapy with every couple with whom I work. One of the first rules is that couples have to agree to come to me for at least 12 consecutive sessions. The reason for this is that a majority of couples quit therapy somewhere between the 3rd and 5th appointments, which is about the time it takes for the unconscious issues to begin to emerge and for couples to experience some anxiety. When you're listening to some of my points on this cassette, you may experience similar anxiety and resistance. It's precisely at these moments that you need to commit yourself wholeheartedly to the process that I'm outlining. My second order of business with couples is to help them define their relationship vision. Before I hear all the things they don't like about their marriage, I want to hear how they would like it to be. It's surprisingly easy for couples to create this vision, even couples who are in a great deal of turmoil. To get them started, I ask them to list a series of positive statements beginning with the word "we" that describe the kind of relationship they would like to have. Here are some examples. We enjoy each other's company. We are financially secure. We spend time together doing things we both enjoy. Once the vision is defined, I ask couples to read it daily as a form of meditation. At this point, I ask couples to make a second commitment, and that's to stay together for the initial 12 weeks of therapy. For 3 months, they're not to separate or to end the relationship in a more catastrophic way by suicide, murder, or insanity. I call the decision to close all 4 of these escape routes the no-exit decision. A husband and wife often react to the no-exit decision in opposite ways. A fuser feels relieved. The isolator feels threatened. I try to ease the anxiety of the partner who feels trapped by pointing out that the commitment is finite. It can end after 3 months. Furthermore, I explain that the no-exit decision tends to make the fusing partner less invasive by setting his or her mind at ease. Ironically, by making an agreement to stay within the relationship for 3 months, the isolator often ends up with more psychic space than before. But it's not just the catastrophic exits that must be closed. There are a myriad ways that couples embroiled in the power struggle avoid dealing with their partners. Here are some examples I've collected from clients. Reading romance novels, disappearing into the garage, having an affair, avoiding eye contact, refusing to make love, living on the tennis court, and going to taverns. These tactics and hundreds of others grow out of anger and fear. They come from the realization that your partner cannot or will not fulfill your needs. You then begin to seek pleasure and satisfaction outside the relationship. It is often harder for couples to close the dozens of small exits in their relationships than it is for them to close the catastrophic exits. In other words, it may be harder to cut down on TV viewing for 3 months than to agree to give up the option of divorce. Part of the reason is that people are reluctant to let go of established sources of need gratification. But closing these small exits is crucial if you are to revitalize your relationship. First, you need to identify which are exits and which are essential activities or valid forms of recreation. The way to find out is to ask yourself, is one of these reasons I'm doing this activity to avoid spending time with my spouse? Having identified the activities you're using as exits, you should rank them according to how hard each would be to give up. If each partner makes some of the easier changes, they will be spending significantly more time together. Once a couple has made a commitment to stay together and to close their exits, the next logical step is to help them become allies, not enemies. In order to make the surest and fastest progress toward their relationship vision, they need to become friends and helpmates. But how can couples put an end to their power struggle when they haven't had the opportunity to resolve their fundamental differences? When two people treat each other the way they did in happier times, they begin to identify each other as a source of pleasure once again, and this makes them more willing to take part in intensive therapy. In order to do this, you must artificially reconstruct the romantic behavior you once practiced naturally with your partner. The best way I've found to do this re-romanticizing exercise is for each partner to write down a list of positive, specific ways their partner can please them. For example, you might write down, "I would like you to massage my shoulders for 15 minutes while we watch television." Or, "I would like you to bring me breakfast in bed on Sunday morning." Partners are to grant each other a certain number of these caring behaviors a day, no matter how they feel about each other. It's important to think of these caring behaviors as gifts. You should not keep score. You should focus only on the giving end of the equation. In order for this exercise not to be predictable, I've added a second component that I call the surprise list. These are caring behaviors above and beyond those requested by your spouse. You generate this by paying close attention to your partner's wishes and dreams. A woman who casually mentions to her husband that she likes a dress she saw in a store window might be delighted to find that very dress hanging in her closet. Interestingly, most of the activities that people write down on their caring behavior list are fairly passive, adult activities. Couples tend to forget how to have fun together. So my final addition to the re-romanticizing process is to ask you to engage in several high-energy, fun activities a week. These should be one-on-one activities like wrestling, tickling, massaging, showering together, or dancing. Competitive sports like tennis are only good if you can play the game together without stirring up tension. In my practice, I've found that almost without exception, when couples begin artificially to increase the number of times a day that they act lovingly toward each other, they begin to feel safer and more loving. This intensifies the emotional bond and sets the stage for increased intimacy. Real intimacy grows when you begin to see your own reality and the reality of your partner. When you accept the limited nature of your own perceptions and become more receptive to the truth of your partner's perceptions, a whole world opens up to you. Every one of your interactions contains a grain of truth, a sliver of insight, a glimpse into your hiddenness and your wholeness. As you add to your growing fund of knowledge, you're creating reality love, a love based on the emerging truth of yourself and your partner, not on romantic illusion. An especially good area to mine is your spoken and unspoken criticisms of your partner. "You never come home on time. I can never lean on you. Why don't you think of me for a change?" At the time you're making these statements, you believe them to be accurate descriptions of your partner, and they often are. But the truth of the matter is that they are often descriptions of parts of yourself as well. Here are 4 principles for gleaning hidden information contained in criticisms. Principle 1. Most of your partner's criticisms of you have some basis in reality. If you can force yourself not to respond defensively, but to think about the possible truth of the criticism, you can become aware of a significant disowned trait. Principle 2. Many of your repetitious emotional criticisms of your partner are disguised statements of your own unmet needs. To examine the truth of this statement, you can follow this simple procedure. Write down your criticism of your partner on a piece of paper. Then ask yourself the following questions. How do I feel when my partner acts this way? What thoughts do I have when my partner acts this way? What deeper feelings might underlie these thoughts and feelings? Did I ever have these thoughts and feelings when I was a child? By going through this process, you can determine whether or not your partner's behavior is bringing back strong memories from your childhood. Principle 3. Some of your repetitive emotional criticisms of your partner may be an accurate description of a disowned part of yourself. To see this, you usually need to do a great deal of soul-searching. For example, let's say you find yourself berating your mate for being disorganized. You need to ask yourself, in what way am I disorganized? You should keep in mind that the way you are disorganized may be quite different from your partner. You may be neat and clean and a whiz at planning your leisure time, areas where your partner has difficulty, but have a hard time prioritizing tasks at work or managing the family budget. Once you can see this, you can separate your own negative traits from your partner's. I'm disorganized in this specific way. My partner is disorganized in that specific way. Principle 4. Some of your criticisms of your partner may help you identify your lost self. Often, when a recurring criticism is not a description of a disowned part of the self, it is a description of another unconscious aspect, the lost self. For example, if you scrutinize your behavior and find that you are supremely well organized in all aspects of your life, your criticism of your partner. Principle 4. Some of your criticisms of your partner may help you identify your lost self. Often, when a recurring criticism is not a description of a disowned part of the self, it is a description of another unconscious aspect, the lost self. For example, if you scrutinize your behavior and find that you are supremely well organized in all aspects of your life, your criticism of your partner might be an unconscious wish to be less organized, to be more relaxed, flexible, spontaneous. When partners criticize each other for being too energetic, too sexy, too playful, too dedicated to their work, they're often identifying undeveloped or repressed areas of their own psyches. Examining your criticisms of your partner turns out to be an excellent way to gather information about yourself. But how can you increase your knowledge of your partner's inner world? The answer is through improved channels of communication. When our partners behave in ways that conflict with our self-interest, we have an arsenal of weapons to help us maintain our illusions. We can condemn them. You're a bad person for feeling that way. We can educate them. You don't really feel that way. What you really feel is. We can threaten them. Unless you change your mind, I'm going to. We can ignore them. Very interesting, as I was saying. Or we can analyze them. The reason you have such unacceptable thoughts and feelings is that years ago your mother. In all of these responses, what we're doing is diminishing our partner's sense of self and replacing it with our own self-serving illusion. Mirroring is the name of a communication technique that avoids this pitfall by helping you to really hear what your partner is saying. Mirroring is a deceptively simple exercise that is commonly used by marital therapists. When one of you has something to communicate, you simply state it in a short declarative sentence starting with the word I. I enjoyed talking about our problems last night. Your partner then paraphrases your remark and asks for confirmation. You're glad that we took the time last night to talk about the things that are bothering us. Am I understanding you correctly? You repeat this process until your partner clearly understands both the semantic and the emotional content of what you're saying. Then you move on to another statement. That's all there is to it. But this deliberate style of communication is so foreign to most couples that it usually requires a great deal of practice. Often the hardest thing about your mastering this exercise is to successfully avoid an active response to your partner's statements. We tend to want to defend ourselves, to propose an immediate solution, or to apologize. But the point of the exercise is simply to hear and to be heard, clearly and precisely. And when the exercise is done successfully, partners tend to feel a tremendous exhilaration and satisfaction in knowing that their message got across. We feel validated. We no longer feel that we have to cut off parts of ourselves to be accepted. In doing this exercise, we're beginning to heal some of the childhood wounds that our caretakers inflicted when they told us our feelings were unacceptable. All the exercises and techniques I've described up to now are methods that bring you back in contact with a partner from whom you've been alienated in the power struggle. Very often, after the initial success partners have in coming face to face again through mirroring and re-romanticizing, they suddenly make the unpleasant discovery that neither of them can be the savior for the other. In fact, many people come to the sobering conclusion that what they want most from their partners is what their partners are least able to give. If the daughter of a distant, self-absorbed father unconsciously selects a workaholic for a husband because of the close imago match, how can her marriage satisfy her need for closeness and intimacy? If the son of a depressed, sexually repressed mother chooses to marry a depressed, frigid wife, how can he recapture his sensuality and joy? Clearly, if people are going to be healed, their partners have to change. The workaholic husband must willingly redirect some of his energy back to his wife. The depressed, frigid wife must recover her energy and sensuality. Then and only then will they be able to give their partners the consistent nurturing they've been looking for all their lives. But here's where our unconscious selection process finally helps us out. While it is often true that what one partner needs the most is what the other partner is least able to give, it is also the precise area where that partner needs to grow. For example, if Mary grew up with caretakers who were sparing in their physical affection, she most likely has chosen a husband, George, who is uncomfortable with bodily contact. The unmet childhood need in Mary is usually matched by George's inability to meet that need. But if George were to overcome his resistance to being affectionate in an effort to satisfy Mary's needs, not only would Mary get the physical reassurance she craved, but George would slowly regain contact with his own sensuality. In other words, in his efforts to heal his partner, he would be recovering an essential part of himself. The unconscious selection process has brought together two people who can either hurt each other or heal each other, depending upon their willingness to grow and change. How can people be encouraged to work on overcoming their limitations so that they can meet their partner's needs? I have developed an exercise with some of the same features as the re-romanticizing exercise. In this stretching exercise, each partner develops a list of requests, which the other partner is free to honor or not. In this case, however, the requests are for potentially difficult changes in behavior, not for simple, pleasurable interactions. In fact, virtually every one of the requests focuses on a point of contention. How do you decide exactly what behaviors you want to request of your spouse? Despite all our criticisms and complaints about our mates, it's rare that we can state in positive, specific terms exactly what we need from our partners. The key is to examine your criticisms in such a way that you can isolate the desires hidden in your frustration. Then you can convert these general desires into specific behaviors that would help satisfy those desires. This becomes the curriculum of your relationship. Here's an example from a recent couples workshop to show how this exercise works. I asked a volunteer to state a significant gripe about his or her partner. A woman named Melanie raised her hand. "Stuart has a terrible memory," she says. "It seems to be getting worse. I'm always nagging at him about his memory." Stuart promptly began to defend himself in a weary tone of voice. "Melanie," he said, "I'm a lawyer. I have to remember thousands of pages of legal briefs. I have an excellent memory." Before Melanie had a chance to restate her criticism, I asked her what bothered her most about Stuart's inability to remember. She thought for a moment. "I guess when he forgets to do something I've asked him to do, like last week when he forgot that we had a date to go out to lunch." "Well, what deeper feelings might underlie these frustrations?" I asked. "Well, when he does things like that, I feel unloved. I feel he doesn't care for me. I guess I want him to show me I'm important to him, that he's thinking of me." At that point, I asked Melanie to write down a list of specific behaviors that would help her feel more cared for. Here are a few of her requests. "I would like you to set aside one night a week so that we can go out for the evening. I would like you to call me on the phone once a day just to chat. I would like you to remember to pull out my chair for me tonight at dinner. I would like you to give up your separate bedroom so that we can sleep together every night." I then asked Stuart to rank these requests in the order of difficulty and to choose one that he could honor with relative ease. He cheerfully agreed to begin by remembering to pull Melanie's chair out at dinner that very night. But he also admitted that some of the requests seemed very difficult for him to do. For example, he thought it would be very hard for him to give up his own bedroom. It came as no surprise to me that that was the thing Melanie wanted most. One partner's greatest desire is often matched by the other partner's greatest resistance. At this point, Stuart volunteered to share his list. His main criticism of Melanie was that she was too judgmental. One of Stuart's specific requests was that Melanie praise him once a day. Melanie acknowledged that some days it would be hard for her to do that. "I don't think I'm being hypocritical," she said. "I think the problem is that Stuart does a lot of irresponsible things." But one of the benefits of this stretching exercise is that Melanie didn't have to agree with Stuart's assessment of her in order for the healing process to work. All she had to do was comply with his simple request for one compliment a day. When she did this, she became more aware of her husband's positive qualities, and eventually she learned how immersed she had been in the role of judge and critic. In the process of healing her husband, she became a more whole and loving person herself. And in time, Stuart was able to overcome his resistance to sharing a bedroom with Melanie. In the process, he discovered his own repressed need for affection and was able to satisfy a hidden need of his own. I have witnessed this phenomenon of two-way healing so many times in my work with couples that I can now say with confidence that most husbands and wives have identical needs, but what is openly acknowledged in one is denied in the other. When the partners with the denied need are able to overcome their resistance and satisfy the other partner's overt need, a part of the unconscious mind interprets the caring behavior as self-directed. Love of the self is achieved through the love of the other. When this stretching exercise is integrated into your relationship, the healing power of marriage is not just an unconscious expectation, it is a daily fact of life. You will move beyond the power struggle and beyond the stage of awakening into the stage of transformation. Your relationship will now be based on mutual caring and love, the kind of love that can best be described by the Greek word agape. Agape is a self-transcending love that redirects eros, the life force, away from yourself and toward your partner. The pain of the past is slowly erased, and both of you will experience the reality of your essential wholeness. The process I've outlined here is a very condensed description of a profound journey. You might want to supplement your understanding by reading my book, Getting the Love You Want. In the book, I raise issues that are beyond the scope of this tape, the most important of which is how to convert anger into intimacy. In addition, my book outlines in structured form the series of exercises that can help you and your partner develop a conscious marriage. When partners learn to see each other without distortion, to value each other as highly as they value themselves, to give without expecting anything in return, to commit themselves fully to each other's welfare, love moves freely between them without apparent effort. The word that best describes this mature kind of love is not eros, not even agape, but yet another Greek word, philia, which means love between friends. The partner is no longer perceived as a surrogate parent, a healer, but as a passionate friend. I have found no better description of this rare kind of love than in 1 Corinthians 13. Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast. It is not proud. It is not rude, it is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects. It always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails.
This has been a Sound Editions presentation from Random House.